like to formally welcome you all to this event. And the event is called Can Women Be Monks Too? The Long Road to Full Ordination for Theravāda Women. And it certainly is my pleasure on behalf of Metta Centre to host this really important event and to explore this topic. And very much honoured to have Ayyā Dhammananda from Thailand and Ayyā Suvīrā here in Australia to present on this two-part series on the Bikini revival. And so as part of this series, we will explore about the history of Bikinis and why the Bikini revival was such an important event for Buddhism globally. And this week, we will have Ayyā Suvīrā presenting a brief history of the global Bikini revival. And next week, we will have Ayyā Dhammananda to present her experiences of reviving the Thai Bikini lineage and the history of Bikinis in Thailand. So our speaker here today is Ayyā Suvīrā. Ayya is a Buddhist nun in the Theravāda tradition and a student of Bhante Sujato. She's the resident monastic of Mettārāma in Sydney and is also assisting Sutta Central. And she's just a really good spiritual friend to many. And I think there's a lot of us here today who know her and probably have had her touch our hearts in many ways. So for tonight's session, Ayyā Suvīrā will be sharing her presentation and we will have time for Q&A towards the end of the session. So feel free to include in the chat box any questions or comments and I will help to moderate them as we go along. So please join me in welcoming Ayyā Suvīrā for his presentation. Thank you, Ayya.
Thank you. What a beautiful welcome. I'm just also really honoured to be able to present to you on the topic of bikinis. I just want to acknowledge Ranjani, who's in the audience. She's just sitting there as a name on the screen. Ranjani, who's on the screen on the right-hand side, is actually Ranjani de Silva, who has been she has been described as, the world's, the person most responsible for the Bikini revival. So I'm giving the presentation, but, just acknowledging that we're really blessed to have Ranjani herself here. So you can all hear me, yeah? The audio's fine.
Yep.
Okay, all good. So we have slides, we have audio. So let's have a look at the Theravāda Bikini revival. Again, the Theravāda Bikini revival is a very huge and complex topic. So to keep it manageable for me, I'm going to be focusing on the key ordinations of 1996 and 1998. Hopefully in enough detail so that we can actually have a good grasp of what's really going on with these ordinations. So I've had a look at the names on the screen, the people who are attending, and I hope this is pitched at the right level for you. I'm guessing most of you do actually have an idea of what bikinis are already, but because I didn't know, what type of audience to expect, I have included some definitions. So we'll go through those. So this presentation is dedicated in honour of international bikini activist Ranjani de Silva's 84th birthday. May she have a long and happy life. This year is also 25 years since the 1996 sāmaṇerī ordination, which occurred on December the 8th, 2021. So I thought, 25 years, that's a quarter of a century since this key ordination. It's a good time to actually really be reflecting about, where we've come from in terms of Buddhist nuns, and how we should be thinking about that early history. So in the presentation, we'll be looking at some key questions. First of all, what is a bikini? What was the Theravāda Bikini revival? What some of the issues involved are, and how did the 1996 sāmaṇerī and 1998 International Bodh Gaya ordinations take place? Okay, so a little bit of context around that. So the information in this presentation is on the basis of 3 years extensive research for Ranjani de Silva's biography, the publication of which is forthcoming. There's a lot to be talked about, and the information I'm giving, it's bare basics to understand 1996, 1998, not intended to be comprehensive. And also, I'm not here to judge anyone's ordination. I'm not the Vinaya expert. I can't give Vinaya. I can't give a legal ruling. I'm just here to provide a general overview in enough detail that we can get our heads around it. I also don't have any close institutional relationships with any of the monks or nuns directly involved in 1996 or 1998, although I do know Ayyā Suvīrā from that 1998 group.
Suvira, we are only seeing the first slide.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
Slideshow. You need to be the one to move the slides.
But I am moving the slides. That's why I'm a little bit...
They're not coming across to us.
Okay. In that case, I'll escape the slideshow. And...
we just saw the second one.
Yeah, what I can do, I can show you
it's working now, Venerable. When you do that, it's working.
Yeah, I'll show you the slides in my PowerPoint rather than trying to present whole screen, because it seems that that's working better.
Yep.
Okay. So a lot of, just a bit of context. Our understanding of 1996 is actually still in development, but because Ranjani's biography is going to be published soon, I just wanted to, very humbly share some material which will be included in the biography. And some of this is just going to give a little bit more context and detail around material which has been published anyway. So there's been 25 years since 1996. There's also been 25 years of talking about 1996. So it's not, what I want to do is just really clarify some of the themes that have come up from those discussions. And having sufficient detail around this is essential for us to actually have a meaningful conversation about the Bikini revival. And ultimately, the place where we all want to be headed is a place where we can have accurate, strengths-based discussions about Bikinis. So, obviously, to get to the point where we can be publishing Ranjani's account of the Bikini revival, just so many people had to be involved. Including Ayya Kusuma and Ayya Dhammananda, as well as Ranjani herself. Most of the new information in this presentation is taken from the official documentation provided by Venerable Sungla, who was the Bikini preceptor of the 1996 ordination at Sāmaṇerī. And special thanks to Ayya Tathalika, Ayyā Sujato.She, Venerable Yujong from the Korean Jogya Order Foreign Affairs Division. Actually, I don't know if they have a division, but she's the Korean Jogya Order Foreign Affairs representative. And also to Professor Cho and Sue from Seoul National University and Sakibita, Korea, for making, this information available. So, any errors are still my own, and unless attributed, the views that I'm presenting are my own. So today I'll be presenting on Bikinis from a Theravāda perspective with a focus on Sri Lanka. There are 5 Theravāda Buddhist countries: Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Laos and Cambodia, the red countries on the map. Another way of thinking about this is to talk in terms of Southern Buddhism, where we mainly look at the geographical distribution of the Theravāda school. I'm not going to question what's on the map. But you can see also that the orange section, which is Yunnan in China, where they have historically had a very strong connection to Buddhism coming from Laos and also along the Burmese border. And you can see some of the pink sections too. That's Maharashtra in India. Theravāda Buddhism has also been quite important in the Indian Dalit Buddhist movement. Nepal, which is pink, purple. There's all types of Buddhism in Nepal. Some parts of Vietnam, and Malaysia and Indonesia aren't indicated, but Malaysia and Indonesia also have significant Theravāda minorities. That's the geographical distribution of Theravāda Buddhism. But there's also a parallel need to revive Bikini Ordination in the Mulasavastivāda tradition, which is the green on the map, which still remains unaddressed despite extensive research. E.g. the 2007 International Congress on Buddhist Women's Role in the Sangha. But today I'm mostly talking about Theravāda because unless I have some meaningful parameters, there's just going to be a lot of information and not much structure to that. So about the fourfold assembly in Buddhism, Buddhism's for everyone. The Buddha had a fourfold assembly consisting of bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, upasakas, and upasikas. So bhikkhus are male itinerant alms mendicants, aka monks. Bhikkhunis are female itinerant alms mendicants, aka nuns. Upasakas are the laymen disciples, and upasikas are the lay women disciples. So to expand that a little bit, we can also talk about 7 classes of disciples. And how we make this expansion is by adding in the novices. So, by the number of precepts observed, the bhikkhus have 227 precepts, the bhikkhunis have 311 precepts, and the reason why the numbers are different is a little bit complex. Sometimes there are additional, in a sense, protections for the nuns or something which is specific for the nuns. Other times it's because, they just are really just more rules for the nuns. Sometimes it's because the rules have been split up differently. So we can't really make any blanket statement about the fact that Bikinis have more rules. It's just not possible because the Bikini Vinaya is also very, the textual history is a little bit complex. And, some of these things are just very specific features of the Bikini Vinaya. So the next class is Sikamanas, who are the female trainees. So they have 6 precepts with an asterisk. And the asterisk means, I want to indicate that there's a high degree of sectarian variation. And this particular ordination category isn't well preserved in Pali texts. If we want to see a different approach to Sikamana training, we should actually look at the Theravāda Vinaya, which is outside the scope of discussion. So that's why it's just got a little asterisk, because the textual history around that is just very unclear. So we also have sāmaṇerīs, who are male novices who observe 10 precepts, sāmaṇerīs, who are female novices who observe 10 precepts, and upasakas, who typically have 5 or 8 or 10 precepts, and upasikas, who typically have 5 or 8 or 10 precepts. And I said typically, again, because there's different ways of thinking about this, and things can be a little bit individual. So just to give an illustration, it's very difficult to find pictures of a fourfold assembly, but I found you one. I found you one from NBM. So we can see 6 out of 7 classes of disciples here. We have bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, sāmaṇeras, one sāmaṇera, sāmaṇerīs, upasakas, upasikas. We don't have sikamanas because sikamana ordination wasn't introduced into our tradition. And again, like I said earlier, it's just because of the history was too complex for us to actually reintroduce this particular ordination type. So a complete Bikini order was introduced to Sri Lanka from the 3rd century BCE, and I have a lovely photo which has been provided by Ranjini Auntie, which shows the inscription recording the ordination of the first Bikinis in Sri Lanka at the Anula Devi Chaitya. So this is just north of Mahintale, off the Jaffna Highway. So you can see under that sand there, that's actually, the inscription saying that this was the place where the first Bikini ordination occurred in Sri Lanka. I mean, I could have shown you the photos of Sangha Mettārāma, but I thought that's a little bit conventional. I've shown so many photos of Sangha Mettārāma, I wanted to show a different photo. So in other locations, talking about the transmission of the Bikini lineage internationally, Bhikkhu and Bikini ordination, the Bhikkhu ordination introduction occurred much earlier, the Bikini ordination introduction occurred later, was introduced in China in the 5th century by Ayyā Suvīrā, aka Dhammasara, who is also referred to as Ayyā Santinī in some sources. The Bikinis involved in this ordination were from Sri Lanka. They most likely were affiliated with the Bikini Monastery, How do we know that? We know that because Fa Hsien, also visited the Abhayagiri Monastery in the 5th century. And the Abhayagiri Monastery was much more well connected internationally than the Sri Lankan Mahavihara. So we can make a reasonable inference that that's probably the source of the introduction of the Bikini lineage into China, although that being said, it's not stated explicitly in the historical records. But, the key point being that all of our extant Bikini lineages come from Sri Lanka. In the 11th century, Bikini Chandramali from Sri Lanka travelled from Sri Lanka to the Himalayas, but the terrain was difficult and the Bikini lineage was not introduced. See also the unbroken lineage of the Sri Lankan Bikini Sangha from 3rd century BCE to the present by Dr. Hannah Guinness-Wortham. As a result of the 11th century Chola invasion of Sri Lanka, the Theravāda Bikini order was wiped out, leaving Theravāda with 4 out of 7 classes of disciples extant. So just to give a visual, this is the situation after the Chola invasion in Sri Lanka. And actually, when we talk about Sri Lankan monastic lineages, the Bhikkhu order in Sri Lanka had died out too. The Bhikkhu order in Sri Lanka was only revived as a result of bhikkhus, reintroducing it from places like Thailand and Sri Lanka from the 18th century onwards. But I didn't want to talk too much about that because I thought it would get a little bit complicated. But, the basic reason for the disappearance of the Bhikkhu order in Sri Lanka being colonisation. So both the Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni orders in Sri Lanka have been extinct at some point in the past 1,000 years. The Bhikkhu order was revived. The Bhikkhuni order, the revival is a little bit more recent. Okay, I'll be back to my slides. So from the end of the late 19th century, we see the first calls for the revival of the Bhikkhuni order in Sri Lanka. So the first real record I know of anyone advocating for a revival is Anagarika Dhammapala. So, that's in his recorded writings. Later, other prominent Sri Lankan cultural luminaries like GP Lalasekara had also argued for a Bikini revival from the mid-20th century. From the early 20th century, the emergence of 10 precept nuns, known as Dasasilmatas in Sri Lanka, filled the gap. A Dasasilmata order was founded in 1932 by Venerable Siddhamachari, also known as Mary Catherine de Orwis, who had studied Dhamma and Vinaya in Burma for 14 years. For 50 years until the 1980s, these nuns received absolutely no Sri Lankan government support or recognition. So just an overview of some other culturally based ordination forms. Every Theravāda country has developed cultural forms in the absence of Vinaya-based Bikini ordination. So in Thailand, there's Mei Chi, pictured on the left in white. In Cambodia, there's Donchi. In Laos, there's Mei Khao. In Burma, there's Tilashin. And, there's also ordination forms which are specific to a particular lineage, so in the UK, where they've introduced Suvira ordination. Just a fun fact, Burmese Tilashins are actually the world's largest female monastic group in any religion. In 2016, there were over 60,000 Tilashin in Burma. So on the basis of numbers alone, these orders have actually been successful. And there's many great nuns within these particular ordination types. I'm not here, to diminish the accomplishments of these orders in any way at all. And actually, they've been very important in getting us to a place where we can actually have a discussion about ordination. However, culturally based ordination forms can still be deeply ambiguous and lack textual legitimacy. Women who wish to receive a Vinaya-based ordination should not be prevented from doing so, in my opinion. Vinaya literally means training or discipline. Sometimes we call it Buddhist monastic law. The Vinaya itself says nothing about what should be done if the Bikini order dies out. Yet the number one answer from Theravāda Buddhists as to why we can't have Bikinis is because of Vinaya. So to understand, this type of thinking, we need to look at the definition of what a Bikini is. Anyone can leave their home and live a renounced life. However, Buddhism is a text-based religion, so a Bikini is defined in terms of ordination validity. Originally, ordination was given by the Buddha with the words, "Come Bikini." Later, the Bhikkhu Sangha ordained Bikinis. For practical reasons, the education of Bikinis was later transferred to the Bikini Sangha, and ordinations were given with a Bikini quorum and witnessed by a Bhikkhu quorum, aka a dual Sangha ordination model. This superseded earlier models. Which brings us, to the formal definition of what a Bikini is according to the Theravāda Vinaya, which states, whatever nun, brackets Bikini, has been ordained Upasampanna by a united dual community, this is the non-Bikini which is meant in this case. And again, that's important for Theravāda Vinaya because, there's other possible definitions of what a Bikini is. So, not everyone who's called a Bikini is indicated as being a Bikini for the purpose of Theravāda Vinaya. It's only in this particular context of dual Sangha ordination that that's what we're actually talking about as a Bikini. So in the context of the Bikini revival, this, it's raised the question, what do we do now? There are no more Theravāda Bikinis. So there are actually a couple of ways of thinking about this, both of which aren't actually found in the Vinaya themselves. They're interpretations which scholars have had based on the text that we have available to us. So the first way of thinking, I'd say this is actually the conventional Theravāda thinking. This is the type of view that you most commonly encounter if you just talk to, random Theravāda monk. Or, if you're reading stuff which was published, before recently. So the conventional view is very procedurally oriented, based on the ordination validity requirements of the Theravāda, which is a late book of the Vinaya compiled in Sri Lanka. This particular approach only accepts a complete dual Sangha quorum of 10 bhikkhus plus 10 bikinis in the Madhya Desa and 5 and 5 elsewhere. That's just to give the simple account. If you want to know more about this, it's better to go back to the Vinaya itself. This particular approach isn't really concerned with the why of ordination. It's concerned with procedure. And, from this type of thinking, what tends to happen, is there tends to be two options which become apparent. One being to accept the death of the Bikini order, which many, senior monks in Asia and internationally are perfectly happy to do. It's quite, up until recently, for example, I remember Ranjani said, she was told that we need to wait until Maitreya Buddha to have Theravāda Bikinis. So this type of thinking that we can't make a complete quorum, we just have to accept that there's no more Bikinis anymore, it's very, very widespread. The other option would be, actually, if we're trying to fill the quorum, only the Theravāda lineage died out. In East Asia, there are still Dharmaguptakas who have Bikinis. Could we just get the Bikinis in to fill the procedural requirements of the quorum? So, just because of the interruption with the recording, just to revisit the previous slide, I was just talking about, the kind of conventional Theravāda thinking around Bikini ordination. And I just mentioned, in many respects, Thailand's leading scholar monk, Venerable Ajahn Brahm, he has written quite extensively against Bikini Ordination on the basis of this kind of dual Sangha view. And I mentioned Ajahn Brahm as well. Again, very public, long-term opponent of the Bikini revival. Someone who's very much, concerned with this type of procedurally focused thinking. So again, I think it just helps maybe to include some images to put faces to arguments. But like I said, these views are so widespread that, it gets to the point where you forget who even made them in the beginning anymore, because it just, sometimes these knowledges appear like they're, like it's absolute fact, as opposed to being an interpretation. Someone's made a Divinia text which themselves say absolutely nothing about what to do in the case that the Theravāda Bikini order dies out. Okay, and I was saying as well too that, we shouldn't underestimate people who do hold this position. Like I was saying, Ajahn Brahm, basically all English-speaking Theravāda bhikkhus have read the Buddhist monastic code. It has been the standard Vinaya textbook for bhikkhus, basically since it was published, and no one's really superseded it. So just to show, why these views are so prominent. So view number 2 being the kind of single Sangha ordination view, and I've broken it up like this just to make a point. I'm not sure that the people involved themselves would necessarily think of it this way, but I think it's it's meaningful. So this view is that in the absence of a Bikini Sangha, bhikkhus can ordain bikinis. So I mentioned Burmese bhikkhu Venerable Lingan Jacob Sayadaw had argued for this in his Pali language commentary on the Milinda Pantha, which was published in 1949. And, Venerable Analia is another prominent advocate of this position. And actually, when we look historically, even though single Sangha bhikkhu only ordination of bikinis may be the less preferred model, in a global historical context, it's not actually that uncommon. And as a bikini myself, I know this because, in many ways I have, I live with bikinis. We have a lot of chance to talk about the details of people's own ordinations. And, if a nun turned up to me like tomorrow from Asia and said I'd been ordained by bhikkhus only, I wouldn't even blink an eye. So if a bhikkhuni turned up tomorrow and said I was ordained by bhikkhus only in Asia, I wouldn't blink an eye, because it's a lot more common than people realise. And there's lots of reasons for that. Historically, there are certain groups today, even within Mahayana, that only have that have bhikkhu only ordination of bhikkhunis, even after, even though they technically have enough bhikkhunis to make the quorum. And again, the more you're actually dealing with these issues, the more you know about things like that. But, from the perspective, from this kind of procedurally based perspective, you have the definition, what is a bhikkhuni? A bhikkhuni has been ordained by dual sanghas. Obviously, that falls short of the definition we saw earlier. Okay, so to understand, why the bikini revival has developed the way it has, we need to ask a question that makes sense only within the context of this kind of view number 1, which is the dual sangha only perspective. So if we can imagine ourselves within this way of thinking, if the most important thing to do to have bhikkhunis is just to fill the quorum to make the procedure work for the bhikkhuni lineage be imported from East Asia. And I mean, that's the question that a lot of people were asking in the 80s. So that brings me to the next slide, bringing the lineage from East Asia question mark. from the 1980s, the Sri Lankan government, Ministry of Buddhist Affairs, organised a research trip to China to investigate Bikini lineages with henna unitolika, but nothing came of it. And again, Sri Lankan Ministry of the Buddhist Sasana, their particular orientation can really depend on who's there. Sometimes governments change, and the project that might have happened under one set of people, it can lose traction when the next set of people come in. But this did happen. The Ministry of the Buddhist Sasana, they did actually fund a research trip to China, to investigate Bikini lineages that was led by henna unitolika. Much activities in the 1980s to improve the status of nuns meaning Sīlamattas, with nuns meaning Sīlamattas registered in Sri Lanka for the first time. In 1986, assisted by the government, a society of nuns was founded with chapters in every region of Sri Lanka. So this society provided Dhamma training and access to university-level Buddhist study for the nuns. So again, a lot of people working in this era, people like, Kusuma Devendra. And as a result, for the first time, Sīlamattas were actually able to get representation, even within the ministry of the Buddhist Sasana in Sri Lanka. And that's something that didn't happen previously, because the whole concept of Sīlamatta ordination, even though today we might think of it as a model of, Theravāda orthodoxy, when it first came in, it was really controversial, and not all monks supported it. There were some monks who were in this kind of view that women should never wear yellows, they should never wear brown, only at home. So this is actually a really, this is a big step to actually to have Sīlamattas educated and organised. So next slide. Which brings us to the 1987 International Buddhist Nuns Conference. And again, I have this lovely photo kindly provided by Ranjani, which shows the Sri Lankan delegation to the 1987 conference. So this was organised by Venerable Kema, Venerable Pamalechi Somo, and Dr. Chatsiman Kabul Singh, who was presenting on the 25th. So her later ordained name was Ayya Dhammananda. It was a precursor to the Sakadutta International Buddhist Women's Association. And for the first time, there's the birth of a transnational organisation which aimed to restore the Bikini order where it did not currently exist. And, to understand how this happened, we can see it's not just Theravāda, there's also nuns from Tibetan traditions involved. We can see Venerable Kamalechi Somo there. So some of these nuns had previously gone to places like Hong Kong to seek out ordination. I've forgotten where Venerable Kamalechi Somo got her ordination from, but already there's been things happening in the lead up to this which has made this type of conversation possible. And also Ranjani De Silva met Kusuma Devendra for the first time. Key turning point in the revival, because these two ladies become very important quite soon after this. And at the time too, if you look at how this has been reported in the literature by Sakadutta International, you see some reflections on this conference. Today we take it for granted that we have an international Buddhist women's organisation, but the whole concept of a women's conference, where we have Buddhist women talking about Buddhist women's issues, I think at the time that would have been a little bit radical. It's something that just didn't exist previously. So this is a whole new concept, the concept of having a transnational Buddhist women's organisation. In 1988, there was a Bikini ordination given by Phol Guangshan at Shilai Temple in California, and 11 10 precept nuns from Sri Lanka received Ayya ordination as well as Ayya Kema. This ceremony had been preceded by a Bhikkhu-only recitation in Pali by Theravāda monks, led by Venerable Haranpolo Ratnasara and also attended by Venerable Wopula Piyananda and Venerable Mula Ananda. Venerable Kema, one of the founding mothers of Australian Buddhism, was a prominent member of this ordination group, and a number of these nuns still live in Sri Lanka and in other countries. So the image that's kindly provided by Ayya Santinī from the Honouring Those Worthy of Honour article she wrote in honour of Venerable Harmpola Ratnasvara's contributions to the Bikini revival. So 1991, we have the International Buddhist Women's Conference in Thailand at Dhammasara University, organised by Dr. Chatsuman Kabulsing. Her mother was a bhikkhunī, Venerable Varamai Kabulsing, who had been given a Mahayana Bikini Ordination. So they had a chance to go on a tour to her temple, where she organised lunch for all of the participants one day. And, Ranjini recalled this to me in our conversations as being personally inspiring because, that the group, they had a chance to see, women in Theravāda countries being ordained. From 1993, the Sakadeva International Conference was held in Colombo. This was organised by Kusuma Devendra and Ranjini De Silva, attended by Chatsuman Kabulsing. So by this time, and I hope Ranjini can correct me later if I'm wrong, they actually had access to copper records of sila matters, which meant that nuns could be invited quite easily. I think if they hadn't had those accurate records, it might have been a little bit more difficult. Many Sri Lankan sila matters saw and learned about bhikkhunis for the first time, and bhikkhunis were discussed 24/7 at the conference. And again, there's a bit of a backstory to this. Ranjini had told me, originally when they tried to get the approval for this conference, she was pretty much stonewalled. And, she had to pull a lot of strings to actually get this, to get the official Ministry of the Buddhist Sasana approval, which they needed to get the visas and things like that. And when they got the, the ministry approval, there was the caveat, the conference can go ahead, but you can't talk about bhikkhunis. And, what happened? At this conference, they only talked about bhikkhunis. Because for many Sri Lankan sila matters, this is the first time they're seeing bhikkhunis, they're seeing international nuns, and learning that actually other traditions do have bhikkhunis. So I've shown the photo there because I think this is quite important. So I have a beautiful photo there, kindly provided by Ranjini, which shows us some of the protagonists of the revival at the 1993 conference. So we have, that's Dr. Kusuma Devendra on the far left in the white sari, who later ordained as Ayya Kusuma. Dr. Chatsuman Kabulsing in the middle, who later ordained as Ayya Dhammananda. And our beautiful Ranjini, who went on to be a lifelong activist for bhikkhuni issues and a great supporter of the Sakadeva Centre Sri Lanka, in addition to basically organising nearly everyone's ordinations. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the words because it's very, Ranjini has contributed so much. She's been really there for most of the revival. So what happened after this is that Venerable Mappalagama Wipulasara approached Ranjini and Kusuma Devendra. So Venerable Wipulasara was the Chief Secretary of the World Buddhist Sangha Council and President of the Mahagaudiya Society of India, as well as being the Chief Monk of the Paramedhamma Chaitya Pirivana in Ratmalana. So Venerable Wimalajyoti, who we might know from the Buddhist Cultural Centre, had mentioned to Venerable Wipulasara after the conference that these two ladies, Ranjini and Kusuma, were doing big jobs. He approached them and asked, maybe we can send some sila matters to India to serve in the Mahagaudiya Society. So Ranjini mentioned this was the beginning of her first real engagement with Bikini Ordination, and previously she'd been focused on training and education, but she felt it was a natural outcome of the type of discussions they've been having. And Venerable Wipulasara had also been in contact with Sri Lankan monks in the US, such as Venerable Wopula Piyananda, who had been present for the 1988 Shilai ordination and a further US-based ordination in 1994. So I think, we can see some of the transnational character here of the Bikini revival. That, we've had this 1988 ordination in the US, and people who were involved in that are talking. They're talking to monks who are based in Sri Lanka. And there's also some other transnational networks like the World Buddhist Sangha Council involved. And I've shown Venerable Vipulasara's face on this 3.5 rupee stamp from Sri Lanka, and also the Sri Lankan national emblem, which he designed. At my old temple, the Buddhist Society of Victoria in Melbourne, the Buddha Rupa there, the Buddha image, was actually designed by Venerable Vipulasara. So just a little bit of facts. Okay, another beautiful photo of Ranjani, and that's Venerable Vipulasara on the far left, leaning on his hand. The middle is Venerable Revita, so the president and secretary, respectively, of the Mahabodhi Society in India. So over 100 potential candidates were interviewed after a newspaper advertisement, 10 of which were selected. So organised by Venerable Vipulasara of the Mahabodhi Society. Okay, I mentioned that he was on the World Sangha Council and also on the Korean Sangha Council, and very importantly, he was very well connected in Korea. So Venerable Sangwon had actually been his former Sanskrit and Pali student at his college, the Parama Dhamacetiya, from 1982. So she was, the one who was invited from Korea to be the Bikini preceptor for this ordination. And she had founded her own temple in Korea, the Bo-myong Sa, in the Sonhakwan sect. So Korean Buddhism, at last count, maybe there was something like 27 sects. To actually have a sect in Korea, you need to register 3 people. The Sonhakwan sect was a breakaway from the Korean Jogye order that emphasized meditation very early in monastic training, as opposed to the Jogye order's standard syllabus, which can be quite demanding and, not leave monastics with a lot of chance to meditate in the early monastic life. So Korean participation was organised by Venerable Sangwon, the Bikini preceptor, and co-sponsored by the Bo-myong-sa Temple and the Korean Brahmanjong Bikini Order. So again, Korea has, I think, 12 Bikini lineages, but the Brahmanjong Order is one of the Bikini lineages that isn't directly under the Jogye order. So 10 Sri Lankan candidates were ordained at Sarnath by the Korean Sangha. This was a huge event with 108 Korean Sangha members attending. Included senior representatives of all major Korean monastic orders, or at least many. It's a very impressive list, but, I just don't have the slides to go into the details. The Korean Jogye order represents 85% of Korean monastics, and representatives of other orders also participated in harmony. And the 8th patriarch of the Korean Jogye order, Venerable Soam, was Upadhyaya. So, normally when you read about the 1996 ordination, we read that it was conducted by the Korean Jogye order. It's correct. But, actually from the Korean point of view, they had such a broad, cross-representation of orders that I think it's important to know about that too, because it was also important for the Korean side to show their harmony in getting senior representatives from all of their, or at least many of their main monastic traditions, and not just from the Jogye order. So, yeah, we can talk about the ordination being conducted by representatives of Korean Buddhism. So at the 1996 ordination, candidates received a Theravāda sāmaṇerī ordination, likely from Venerable Devasiri, immediately prior to higher ordination. So the candidates wore orange Korean-style robes for the ceremony. You can see in the picture there, the picture comes from the Bokbo newspaper, or Bokbo News. Those are the candidates in the front row from 1996. That's Venerable Sungla in the middle, wearing these very beautiful orange Korean-style robes. The motion was first passed by the Bikinis and then by the bhikkhus. Mugwort burns were given to the candidates on their arms. Venerable Devasiri read the Theravādas afterwards. Then Walpola Piyananda gave the Bikinis Theravāda robes. And please note, the candidates were wearing orange Korean robes and no bodhisattva precepts were given in this ceremony. I just wanted to mention that too because, sometimes when we think Mahayana ordination, we're thinking in terms of triple platform, we're thinking grey robes, but these aren't really accurate ways of thinking about the 1996 ordination. So the Theravāda bhikkhus who were present at 1996, I have the list of 10 names there. And just to pull out some highlights, Venerable Walpola Piyananda had also been present at 1988. Venerable Venerable Dodangota Revata was the secretary of the Mahabodhi Society. Venerable Talale Dhammaloka would go on to be a great supporter of further ordinations via the Sakyadika Centre. Venerable Kakapalye Anuruddha was the first ever Vice-Chancellor of the Buddhist and Pali University of Sri Lanka. Venerable Kambu Gamwe Ajira had also served as Vice-Chancellor of the Pali and Buddhist University. So, normally I wouldn't list the secular qualifications after the names. I just copy and pasted this from the source. But, I had wanted to do that because it does show the participation of of people who've had very significant connections to the Pali and Buddhist University of Sri Lanka in this ordination. They're not just any random monks. These are monks who do actually have some very serious academic qualifications behind them. The vice chancellors of universities and that type of thing. So in terms of the candidates, the 10 candidates, the Sri Lankan candidates who received ordination, they're there in the slide. So we have Venerable Kusuma, Venerable Chandradasi, Venerable Vijita, Venerable Subhadra, Venerable Sutamika, Venerable Sudarshana, Venerable Bhadra, Venerable Sama, Venerable Subhadra, and Venerable Hemapali. So out of the 10, 8 of those continued to live as bhikkhunis after the ordination. The last 2 returned to living as sila matas. So, 80% retention rate, which is, I think that's actually, when you consider the social pressures involved, which are fairly huge, that's actually, a very high retention rate. Again, just considering, the amount of reporting and stress that would have happened around this ordination too. That's a lot of dedication for those who did continue. So I want to highlight some successes of this group as well. So Venerable Kusuma went on to teach internationally, becoming a prominent leader of the global Bikini revival. She developed the Ayyā International Buddhist Meditation Centre, wrote a number of books including an account of the Bikini Vinaya. Venerable Vijita was offered land for the Gautami Arama and received an award from the Anuruddha Mahanayaka for her services. Venerable Siddhamika remained in India and continues to serve at the Indian Mahabodhi Society. Venerable Sama later returned to India to support Indian Bikinis as a missionary. She organised a Bikini ordination in 2009 in Bodh Gaya. Venerable Sudarshana became a US resident. She completed a second master's and later at the Pali and Buddhist University and later at PhD. She founded the Samadhi Buddhist Meditation Centre in Florida. And she also became the first Sri Lankan Bikini preceptor in America, serving as Bikini preceptor for numerous Bikini ordinations in the USA together with Venerable Walpola Piyananda since 2010. So to provide a summary, of the 1996 Sāmaṇerī ordination. So the first thing that happened was the sāmaṇerī ordination with the, sorry, there's a lot of Pali in the slides, I should have put this in English, with the pabbaja being the going forth and the sāmaṇerī sikha being the novice precepts given by the Sri Lankan bhikkhus. And I don't have a written record of this, but Venerable Sudarshan's oral record suggests that this was led by Venerable Devasiri. And I think that's quite likely, actually, but I'm hoping to get in touch with Venerable Wakalapiyananda to confirm. So then we have the Bikini Ordination itself, where first the candidates had to go before the nuns and get ordination. Then on the same day, they went before the monks to get their confirmation. And that's recorded from my oral interview with Ayyā Kusuma. And Ayyā Kusuma has described it as Atavachika Upasampada. In her words, 8 times. That is, so she said 4 times with the monks, 4 times with the nuns. But, when she says times, that should actually be like, 8. The procedure, the Sangha has 8 parts. The ordination certificate lists 14 bhikkhus and 2 bhikkhunis, including the Bikini preceptor, Brian Ensa, Venerable Sungwan, and Dharma teacher, Bopsa, Venerable Bopjong. There would have been more than 20 bhikkhunis in attendance according to the video and pilgrimage logs. However, the ordination certificate reflects only the Bhikkhu Sangha, which I'll be talking a little bit more about on the next slide. So when we do read accounts of this ordination, say, for example, the account by Venerable Kamalekshi Somo, who was there, or the account by Venerable Tamananda, who wasn't, sometimes you do see this ordination described as a single Sangha ordination conducted by bhikkhus, which is incredibly confusing if you speak to Ayyā Kusuma about it. And Ayyā Kusuma, has said, this is a dual ordination tradition. So I hope, just to maybe explain why we do actually have conflicting reports about this ordination. If Ayyā Kusuma is saying it's a dual ordination tradition, what she's describing is the fact that, yes, there were a lot of bhikkhuni witnesses there. She did go through at least some type of procedure with nuns present and some type of procedure with monks present. When Venerable Kamalekshi Somo is saying that it's a single ordination procedure, maybe, we should be referring back to the certificate to see why, because the certificate itself only reflects the bhikkhu's Sangha. So I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. The next part of the procedure, the candidates, they had to go on to live as Theravāda Bikinis. So they were offered Theravāda robes and changed into them. So Venerable Wakalapiyananda offered the robes, and there was a Pali text recitation of the Theravāda / Anisavana by Bhante Sujato.She. Sorry, I should have thought about just how much Pali I actually have in these slides. So I just have brackets. Candidates are instructed in Purajikas, etc. Okay, so I do need a slide on this because we're at this point where we're trying to understand, what the Bikini revival actually means, in accurate terms and in terms which, really credit the amount of work and the amount of just love and dedication that actually went into this. So earlier we talked about dual Sangha ordination. Even though the Dhammaguptaka school has a similar 10+10 dual Sangha ordination format, the same that we find in Theravāda Buddhism in the Madhya Desa, we can see on this certificate for this ordination there are 14 bhikkhu and 2 bhikkhuni names. Although from the video we can know that there were actually many bhikkhuni witnesses present who are not listed on the certificate. And I think, a very obvious question to have about that is why. We've talked so much about dual Sangha ordination, and then when we get to 96, the certificate's telling us a slightly different story. So Dual Sangha Bikini Ordination was officially reintroduced in Korea in 1982 after interruptions. So one of those interruptions was the Japanese occupation of Korea, which ended in 1945, after which the Jogya order was restored from the 1950s, I think, onwards. So, you know, that's one interruption. However, so we have this period between the restoration of the Korean Jogya order and 1982, where full Dual Sangha Bikini ordination was restored. So even after 1982, you know, the old pre-82 model was still kind of floating around. It took a long time for, you know, dual Bhikkhu Bhikkhuni Sangha ordination to be widely established, even after it was officially re-established in 1982 in Korea. Prior to 1982, a different model, which is the Dhammaguptaka commentarial model, had been in use for Bikini ordination. So when we think about ordination models from Korea, it's best to think about our evolving understanding or the evolving understanding of the Korean Sangha of what's actually involved in a dual Sangha ordination. And, you know, this was ongoing not only in the 80s, but through the 90s as well. For example, Sikhamana ordination was only restored from 1995 within the Jogya order. So this is the type of background that we should have in our heads when we're thinking about the modern history of Bikini ordination in Korea. So when we talk about the pre-1982 model in Korea, you know, there is actually a textual basis for that. So that is coming out of the Dhammaguptaka commentarial tradition. So within the Dhammaguptaka commentarial tradition, there are some very prominent Vinaya commenters. One of them is Dao Shen. Dao Shen is, you know, very famous in East Asian Buddhism. You can't encounter, you know, you can't even begin to think about Chinese Buddhism without talking about Dao Shen. So in his, in one of his books, in one of his commentaries, which is the Jiemo Shu, he said, you know, in the past, the Mahishastaka Vinaya was used. It says that 10 bhikshus and 1 bhikshuni are needed for ordination. So the pre-1982 Korean model, this is probably the textual basis for it. It's probably coming out of statements like this within the Chinese commentarial tradition that that influenced the format that that was used to reintroduce the Bikini ordination in Korea after the interruption in ordination. After the interruption in, sorry, just finding my words, after the interruption in Bikini ordination that was caused by the Japanese occupation of Korea. So just to recap, 1950s onwards, the model of Bikini ordination that was introduced in Korea was based probably off the Dhammaguptaka commentary. After 1982, the Jogya order officially reintroduced text-based dual Sangha Bikini ordination. However, this old model, it hung around after that, and the Vinaya-based model, it wasn't universal for a long time. It's a little bit complex, and maybe that's why, you know, this complexity is probably what's been preventing us from having a proper discussion about 1996 and 1998, because so much of our thinking, you know, it's been around, you know, we want, you know, we want to create this this image of legitimacy where we have dual Sangha ordination as being the Vinaya-based model of legitimacy par excellence. But if we actually look at the real history of thinking in East Asia around Bikini ordinations, the East Asian tradition actually has very sophisticated thinking on this particular point. And I think it's important for us not to project some needs that we have as Theravāda Buddhists onto these East Asian traditions. I think what we should be doing, we should be looking at the individual histories of East Asian traditions, in their own right, because they can actually tell us something. And what they tell us is that basically, this type of conventional model where it's dual Sangha or nothing hasn't been held in countries where they have bhikkhunis for basically, most of Buddhist history. So very interesting point. So very soon afterwards, this is after the 96 ordination, Venerable Paragamawe Samalankara was in communication with Phogwang Shan in Taiwan about another ordination. The ordination was organised by Venerable Inamalawe Sumangala of the Australia sect of the Siam Nikaya, aka the Dambula group, who had a prior history of supporting ordination for low-caste men in the Siam Nikaya. This ordination was organised by Phogwang Shan, and I have a beautiful picture there of Venerable Chairman from Phogwang Shan with Ranjani, courtesy of Ranjani. So this ordination was organised in cooperation with Phogwang Shan's International Buddhist Progress Society under Venerable Chairman. International ceremony for candidates from free traditions. 63 candidates from Theravāda traditions, 20 candidates from the Sri Lankan Dambula training group. And I'm not going to talk so much about the actual mechanics of this ordination because as far as I know, it was a pretty straightforward textually based Dhammayaguptaka ordination. What I want to talk about is what happened after it, which is, it's quite significant. Because in Theravāda, or at least in commentarial Theravāda, we have this concept of Daldhikama. So this term Daldhikama is a bit vague. It means different things to different people. But one way of thinking about Daldhikama is to think in terms of a strengthening act. So if there's some defect in the original ordination, we don't want to redo the whole ordination. That's very expensive. It can get very messy for the people involved. Another way of dealing with a defect in the original ordination, it's to perform one of these supplementary Sangha-kamas, which we call a Daldhikama. So at the time of 1998, 10 candidates from the 1996 ordination were also present for this ordination in Bodh Gaya. They haven't left India yet, they're still there for training. So after the 1998 ordination, 33 Theravāda Bikinis, question mark, I have a question mark because I can't quite get the numbers to match and I'm still investigating why, so I have to apologise for that. This is the number according to Ayyā Suvīrā. So 33 Theravāda Bikinis from both the 1996 and 1998 ordination groups received Daldhikama, which converted them to Theravāda. So they were given some type of, they underwent some type of act with Theravāda Bhikkhus. So both the 1996 and 1998 groups underwent the same Daldhikama. Ayyā Suvīrā herself gives 1988 as the year of the Theravāda Bikini revival from the time of the Daldhikama. The candidates from the Dambula group in 1998 went back to ordain more Sri Lankan candidates soon after. By contrast, the Metta Centre continued to invite international Mahayana participation for subsequent ordinations. And that just reflects a slightly different approach, in the way that we're thinking about, who the preceptor is for the ordination. From the 1998 group, Venerable Panagoda Manasari and Venerable Pahatangoda Sadasumana went on to act as preceptors, the first ordination in Sri Lankan soil on March 12, 1998. And, a lovely photo there. Venerable Sutta Suvira on the left, Ayya Dhammananda, and our beautiful Ranjini on the right-hand side. So just to share some major accomplishments of Sri Lankan Bikinis. So we see the development of free main Bikinis training centres in Sri Lanka at Aheliagoda, Dambula and Corona, and many other centres including the Metta Centre. So Bikini Ordination is supported in Sri Lanka by some branches of the Amarapura and Siam Nikayas. In 2019, the Sri Lankan government approved funding for Bikini Theravāda education, Theravāda being monastic college. Venerable Sukeshila was appointed as Deputy Director of the All Iron Nuns Theravāda Office, for the Department of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Venerable Vijayananda was awarded a Rajakiya Pandit Award within the Amarapura Nikaya. It's very, very difficult to give exact numbers, so please forgive me for trying to do this. The minute I give a number of how many bhikkhunis, I know I'm going to get an email from someone, telling me that I shouldn't try to do this. My numbers are wrong. So this is according to Venerable Chandima Pera, who oversaw an almsgiving for all bhikkhunis in Sri Lanka in 2010. So invitations were sent out to 1,000 bhikkhunis. And I'd say that figure, probably was accurate for 2010 because they had to organise the almsgiving. So if you want to correct me on that, just let me know. That's okay. But, just to give people a kind of ballpark estimate of the numbers we're talking about. So still work to be done on the ID card and other issues. The ID card issue is, originally bikinis were able to get ID cards in Sri Lanka, and then I think for about 2004, there was a backflip on that. And at the moment, you can't get the monastic ID as a bikini in Sri Lanka. Some of the women in the system, they're quite young women, they're girls, they want to get an education. It's really important for them to actually be able to get the real monastic ID. So, that there are still ongoing issues, but a lot of successes too. In particular, the funding for the Bikini College, for the Bikini Theravāda. You can see what they've been doing with the money already. And Bikini centres in Sri Lanka, they have actually been able to really step up what they're doing in terms of education because of the availability of that funding. So it's, from my perspective, it's really great news. So Theravāda Bikinis have now spread all over the world, including in USA, UK, India, Thailand, Nepal, Vietnam, Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, China, Germany, etc. So there are bikinis everywhere, which is a great thing. So just a few reflections. The Theravāda Bikini Revival was a massive event for Buddhism, involving the creation of new transnational networks. Given the newness of these concepts, it may be most helpful to think of evolving knowledges and procedures around Bikini ordination from the 1980s onwards. So, some of these procedures, they're a little bit, maybe they're a bit transitional. And that's just because, it's a new thing. Like, people are still working out, what do we even know about ordaining bikinis? And I think, from my perspective, that's okay. Any new undertaking is going to have this degree of evolution involved in it. So this whole process of making the revival happen gave birth to the Buddhist International Women's Movement as the Sakyadhita International Association. The participation of multiple international Buddhist organisations, say for example in 1996 we see the participation of the World Buddhist Sangha Council and the Korean Sangha Council. It's actually a great accomplishment for Sangha harmony. And we can see the revival as a continuing source of joy and inspiration for Buddhists globally. So that's everything from me. I want to pass the floor back to Tina for questions.
Thank you, Ayyā Suvīrā.
And again, just really acknowledging that the only reason I can do this presentation is because, because of really the grace of Ranjini in having shared her life story with the world. and also in this with the with the ongoing cooperation of the of representatives of the Korean Jogya Order and of Venerable Sangwon in helping us to clarify some of these issues. So I'll pass back to Tina.
Thanks, Ayya. And yes, I echo that too. And Ranjani, if you're around and you wish to say a few words, we'll invite you to participate if you like. But yes, thank you, Ayya, for such a detailed and informative presentation. It was actually really inspiring to hear the stories that make up the incredible journey of the Theravāda Bikini revival. And certainly hearing the stories, I feel so grateful for all those who were involved in supporting women ordination all around the world and the efforts that continue to be made. And I can see also we have someone from Sakyadita who is here with us today, and if they would like to pop on, then it will be great to hear a few words from them as well. I hear that there is a book that's coming out.
Yes, we have Ranjani's biography. So Ranjani's biography, I'm hoping to send it off to the publisher, fingers crossed, on September 20th. So I can't give publication timeframes. But again, Ranjani has just been, okay, I'll stop sharing my screen, thank you. Ranjani's just been very excellent in kindly allowing us to really share her version of the revival.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm very interested.
Stop share with me, yeah.
So very interested to hear more about the book when it comes out. So perhaps if that news is sent to us, we can also share that through our Metta Centre networks as well, so more people can have the benefit of reading about the story.
Sure.
There is a question that's come up. So it's from Anisha. Her question is, what can we do to support Bikinis? And she also thanks you, Venerable, for a very useful and inspiring presentation.
Yeah, I mean, what can we do to support Bikinis?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd recommend asking Bikinis. It's sometimes it's a bit too easy to speak for nuns. Actually, what we should be doing is giving nuns a space to basically be able to tell people what their needs are, because some of those can be very local. That's why I haven't talked about issues like, I haven't talked about issues like the status of women, because, these things are just so variable between one place to another. It may be in one place, what we need is more educational opportunities. In another place, quite often in Sri Lanka, what they need is food. It can be food, basic requisites, if there's a proper system set up, some temples just need a little bit more, money or funding available. I know in Sri Lanka, again, we quite often send like robes, requisites back to Sri Lanka, because in the developing world, it can just really be the material basics that nuns need. So, I mean, in Australia, just get in contact with your local nuns and ask them, how can I help? What can I do? That would be my recommendation. I mean, in Sydney, we do have a new monastery project. We have Mettārāma Nuns Monastery, and from my perspective, that's great, because we don't have a Bikini monastery that's Vinaya-based in urban Sydney. So lots of projects coming up internationally. So, send us someone an email, just ask someone, what do you need? It's always the best question.
Thanks, Ayya. And on that note about Mettārāma, I have placed in the chat box right at the beginning about Mettārāma as well. So if anyone is interested, feel free to check out the website. You can also send me a message at Metta Centre, and I'm happy to provide you with some information as well. We've got another question that's come up. So this is from Anne. So dear Ayya, if they still are not having, and if they still don't have ID in Sri Lanka, can Bikinis in Sri Lanka have passports and travel around for teaching the Dhamma?
My understanding is that you have to have the passport in your lay name in Sri Lanka at present if you're a Bikini. Which to us, my passport, my Australian passport's in my lay name. It's not a big deal, for the type of things I need to get done. My Sri Lankan Bikini friends, they are travelling before before COVID anyway, they were travelling back on their lay passports. However, when you need to register for certain things, it can be very difficult historically, to register under that lay name, because the assumption in Sri Lanka is that you're using monastic registration. So when it comes to exams, this particular issue of can I register under my lay name, they have had to negotiate around that for the young girls who are looking to take exams, which is it's horrible, because it's just one more barrier or complexity, to the girls who are in the system.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you for that, Ayya. Now, there probably are some more questions as well, but I do note the time, and we will be back next Wednesday. So I hope everyone will be able to join us next Wednesday. Ayyā Suvīrā will be back, and we'll also be joined by Ayya Dhammananda as well. So I hope we'll see all of you again. And if you do have any more questions or comments, please feel free to send them across to me in the coming week, or you can just share it next week on Wednesday. So I'll invite everyone to join me in thanking Ayyā Suvīrā for her time today, but also the effort placed in her research and just putting this presentation together. It was just mind-blowing in terms of all of the information that you were able to share in such a clear way. Because as you said a number of times, it is quite complex. There are a lot of complex issues and historical issues as well. And it's just incredible that you've been able to make it such a concise and well-structured presentation to inform us about all those matters. So thank you again, Ayya. Thank you everyone for being here, and I'll see you all next Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.